Hello everybody, welcome to Graphics Wizardry with me, Phil Smith. Today we're going to be looking at producing a technical illustration in Illustrator with a view specifically to using one of these images or a series of these images as a kind of like a visual storyboard. So if you're putting a project together where you need to visually explain something rather than like go through in ridiculous intricate depth of text to describe something, then this is a really nice way of doing it. And the technique that I'm going to be showing you inside Illustrator is one that's used in industry. So it's not something that's just been cooked up specifically. It's not a weak source version of it. It's literally something that is done by technical illustrators in the engineering industry and product industry. Often you'll find if you buy something, there'll be a little handbook that comes with it, which has got this sort of drawing where it explains how to plug it in or whatever. And the style that I'm going to be showing you guys is something that's used to do that. So I went through this with the students last time I did this as a tutorial at the university. So I'll very briefly just explain to you, if you're not familiar, the way of getting around Illustrator. I'm a big believer in the idea that you need to be completely instinctual in terms of how you use the software. So when you're moving around the document, if you hold down space on the keyboard, then you get the hand and you just simply click and drag. If you hold down space and control on a PC or command on a Mac, you'll get the magnifying glass, which allows you one click to zoom in, or if you click and drag over something, then that will be zoomed in to fill the screen. Now, Illustrator doesn't work in the same way as Photoshop. There's no scrubby zoom. I can't click and drag left and right to zoom in and out. So if I zoom right in, what I have to do is to press space, command on a Mac or control on a PC, or an alt at the same time, and you'll notice that the plus on the magnifying glass will turn to a minus when you hold down Alt. So it's worth thinking of Alt usually as it providing sort of an alternative version of whatever it is that you're using. So in this case, it's as an alternative to zooming in, we've got zooming out. And if you want to zoom out all in one go so that the whole document is visible on the screen, if you press Command on a Mac or Control on a PC, 0. So there we go. You'll notice that in Illustrator we've got the layers palette in much the same way as Photoshop, and much like Photoshop I'm going to try and work clean. So I'm going to rename this Photo Ref. In fact, I'm not just going to rename this file, I'm going to double click on the icon, the thumbnail, and get the layer options window up, and the detail that I'm going to change is I'm going to dim this layer to 50%. And what this will do is you notice that it will kick back the image so that when I'm drawing the lines, it won't contrast with them. It will be easy to see what is a drawn line and what's the background image. This image is of one of my students taking the micro USB transmitter out of the back of a mouse, and it was part of a series of images that we did. So rather than actually going through and drawing all of those and making this an incredibly long and, you know, exceedingly tedious tutorial, I'm just going to walk through drawing this one. So I'm actually just going to add a new layer in called Pans, and I'm going to lock the photo ref layer. So this space just here, when you click on this, locks the layer. The little eye to the left, when you click on it, shows and hides each individual layer so you can see them separately. So the first thing that I need to do is to set up a couple of graphic styles so that when I need to change line thicknesses, which is an important part of the drawing style I'm going to be showing you today, I don't need to keep going through and manually changing all of the details separately. So first of all, I'm just going to draw a couple of shape like this. And you see that that's got a white fill and a black stroke. So you may recognize this as being similar to the image in Photoshop. But in Photoshop, these two colors work differently. So the front one would be the foreground and the background is this one in the back in Photoshop. In Illustrator, this colour here is the fill colour of the shape. So you can see as I change that, it adjusts this filled area of the shape. And the back shape is the stroke, which is the colour of the outline of the object. So for the work that we're doing today, I want to set it so that there is no fill, and the stroke is just 100% black. So that's the colours that I want for this. No fill, and you can see that the no fill is represented by the white square with a red line across it, which is just here. and black for the stroke. If you don't have this in your color palette, if it's not visible, is accessible through window color. It may be that your palette looks something just like this, which is not ideal. If that's the case on your computer, right click in the top right hand corner menu for the color palette and show options, and then you'll have either this or it might be the RGB color selector. Either one is fine really for what we're doing. We'll get into the differences between RGB and CMYK at some later date, but just for putting some lines down at the exact moment that we're working on it now, don't worry about it too much, we'll be fine. Okay, so I'm sort of happy with, this is sort of okay colors, but there's a few other details that I need to change. What I want is for this line to sort of look a little bit like an actual pen has drawn it. So I'm going to make some adjustments to the stroke. Your stroke settings may look like this. Show options to get this beautiful, massive overload of information here. So for this line, I want to have 2-point thickness. You'll notice that the end of this line here is completely square, which is not mirror how a pen would actually work in real life. So I'm going to give it a round end cap. The other thing that I'm going to change is this corner here is extremely pointy. So rather than being pointy with a mitre joint, I'm going to have a round corner like this. So I'm satisfied that that is going to be okay for one of my line thicknesses. So I'm going to save this so I don't have to keep making all of these changes all the way through. So I'm going to click on graphic styles. Again, if that's not visible on your menu, your selections down here, I'm going to just get it from the windows just here. Yours may already have a whole bunch of them in there. That's fine. You don't need them, but you don't have to get rid of them because there probably won't be very many in place. I'm going to create a new one by this button down here underneath the graphic styles thing, which says new graphic styles. Click on that, and you should see a box appear like this, which has just got another box inside, which represents the graphic style that we're saving. I'm going to make one change to this, which is to reduce the line thickness to 1 point. So you see it's half the thickness now. And I'm going to just create a new one. So we've got a thin line thickness and a thick line thickness. And any object that I've got selected, by clicking on these two, I can determine which one I want to be which. Hey, Phil, why do you need 2 line thicknesses? Who cares? Why not just have one? Why not have 20? Well, again, this is down to this sort of visual convention that exists in doing this particular style of illustration. So basically the way that it works is when you've got an edge to an object, so Edwin's hands here have got, that's an edge to that object. It's kind of like where the edge of a silhouette would be. This mouse has got an edge just here. Anywhere where you're sort of looking over the edge of something onto another material or to another section of the object, so this edge just here is represented by a thick line. So this would be a thick line. This outline around this little USB thing here would be thick outline. Anything where there's a surface line, so for example this line just here, which is just a moulded bevel on the mouse, or even these creases on Edwin's hands here, are represented by a thin line. So the thin line indicates that there's something there, but it's not a sort of a material transition. The thick line indicates that there is a separation between the background and the foreground. And that's how we're going to communicate sort of the depth of this object and explain to the viewers what the relative positions of everything are. We're only really going to use one tool to draw anything with today, and that's this tool, the pen tool, which you can get either from just here, it looks like a little old-fashioned fountain pen, or by clicking P on the keyboard. It's actually the same key combination as in Photoshop, and it's easy to remember because P is a pen. So let me just give you a couple of little pointers about using the pen, because I know that some of the viewers will be my uni students who are not super familiar with Illustrator. So if you are super familiar with Illustrator, you can fast forward through this bit down at the little this little arrow at the bottom of the YouTube video. Otherwise, let me just show you this. So if I've drawn a shape like this, zigzag shape, by dot to dot and clicking, that's a very easy way of using the pen tool. If you click and then click and hold, you see that it pulls out handles which will what we call weight the Bezier curves, so weight the curves equally both on this side of and on the other side of, before and after the control points, the anchor points. So either way of working like this is fine. If you're drawing straight lines, you simply click. If you come to a point where you need to draw a curved line, then you can draw a curved line like this. And now, so you'll see that this curve will now be what I call symmetrical. So if I pull the handle out here, the other handle pulls out. If I change the angle, both handle angles work. So if I want to change directions with this line, then that can be a bit of a problem. So if, for example, I was drawing a heart, when I got to this part here, obviously, the next line that I draw is going to end up going off in the wrong direction. So at this point, if you hold down Alt, then you can change direction in the line. And draw whatever you want. So if there's a point where you need to make changes after you've drawn the line, you've got a couple of selection tools that you can use. If you press a V on the keyboard, you get this, the selection tool, the black solid arrow. And I guess you can remember it because it looks a bit like an upside down V as the key combination. Now what this does is it selects the whole object as though it were a single rigid block. And you'll notice that each one of these control points, each one of the anchor points is solid, filled with the selection color, which is in this layer red. If you press A on the keyboard, notice that the arrow changes to the other selection arrow. This is called the direct selection tool. And this allows you to select individual anchor points and even the handles and make changes which don't affect the whole of the rest of the object. Now you can drag select multiple objects, multiple control points, and it will move them around simultaneously. Or you can hold down Shift and select a bunch together and move them around. And the other thing that you might notice when you use the direct selection tool is that there's a small circle inside of the angles, and what that does is it allows you to add a curve to any corner. But we're not going to be using that, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. That's something that Adobe have added in, I think, in the most recent version of Illustrator. It's kind of useful, it's quite cool, but we're actually not going to use it. What we're doing today is extremely basic, so we're just going to be going around and basically tracing all of the lines on the hands and on the mouse. So we're going to dig into that now. The other detail is once you're drawing something and you're ready to draw the next line, what you do is you can deselect the object you're working on by pressing Control on your PC or Command on your Mac and getting whatever the selection tool is and simply clicking in empty space, and that will deselect everything, and now I can work on the next line. Control click, Control click. So that's how I'm going to do this. I'm going to use the thick line thickness and simply start drawing. Now your goal when you're working on things like this is kind of to use as few a number of points as possible, because you get much smoother look to the drawing if you work like that. But there's no one's going to arrest you if you end up having to drop a few extra points in just to make sure that you get the line, the shape that you want. There's no sort of hard and fast rules about where your points need to be. So unfortunately, I can't simply say, oh, what you definitely need to do is just this one simple thing to determine where the next points need to be. Essentially, the only way that you're going to know where your points need to be when you're putting these lines down is kind of by trial and error. I've been using Illustrator for quite a long time, so I sort of understand where the lines are going to go and how to break the shapes up. But like I said, I can't really give you a particularly definite explanation as to how it works. The solution is to simply do a lot of drawing with the pen tool, and to build some of that knowledge yourself, and hopefully begin to get a more instinctual understanding of how to put these images together. I just realised I did something that is not easily explained. So I did, in order to make sure that I could group select this here, I've overshot with one of the lines. And when you're zoomed out, it can be a pain in the neck to actually pick that individual one up. So sometimes what I'll do, if they're very close, is I'll select the object here, lock it, which you do by pressing Control on a PC or Command on a Mac, 2. So now I can't actually select that shape. Dragging a selection marquee over that object to pick the pointer up, moving that back into place, and then pressing Control on a PC, Command on a Mac, Alt 2 to unlock the object and drop back into where we were before. I wasn't planning on explaining that because it's a sort of slightly more advanced thing, but since I did it, and I can't be bothered to edit out that I did it, I thought I'd just briefly explain it. The other way of picking up which line thickness you want to use is whichever the last object that you've selected is in terms of line thickness. So, for example, I just used a selection tool to select this line here. Because that's the thick line thickness, that means that the next line that I draw will sort of inherit its line thickness. So rather than having to go all the way back over here, I can kind of use the drawing itself as a palette from which to select these the appropriate line thickness. What you'll notice that I'm doing is, rather than digging into all of the little details, in the same way as I sort of recommend when we were doing the Photoshop rendering, that you simply get the broad shapes in place using the thick line thickness in this case. And then once these are done, then's the time to drop back in with the thinner line thickness pen and ensure that all of the details are in place. Okay, well, I realise, as I'm sort of quite aware the same way that I was whilst I was demoing this at the university, that you're just sort of watching me draw a mouse, except in this case I'm sort of probably heavy breathing in your ear because the microphone's right here. I'm afraid I don't have a great deal of entertaining banter to walk through whilst we're doing this. I was tempted to tell you a joke that I heard at the weekend, but I've just realised it would be massively inappropriate because it's incredibly rude. So possibly if you collar me whilst I'm teaching at some point, I may tell you. But I don't want to have this YouTube channel rated as age inappropriate, so I think I'll have to withhold that particular joke. Although, I'll be honest, it is pretty funny. Okay, so you notice what I've done now is to start drawing in with the thin line thickness. Just hide the background to give you an idea what it looks like now. Obviously the outlines of the hands are quite well defined and the outline of the mouse. What I'm going to do now is to sort of reinforce the structural shape of both of them by using the thin line thickness as the pan. Hands can traditionally be sort of quite tricky to draw. Fortunately, because of how we're working with using a photo as reference, you'll find that a lot of the problems that you might ordinarily find in terms of visualizing what the three-dimensional shape of the hand is and then converting that onto the page, some of those problems are solved simply because of the fact that you're able to use a direct reference. But you can still end up with a sort of wonky looking hand at the end of it if you're not particularly familiar with how to draw hand anatomy. So hands are interesting things to draw, and you'll usually have a spare one to hand, as it were, whilst you're working in your sketchbook. So since you find yourself drawing them so frequently whilst you're doing illustrations like this, it might be worth your while familiarising yourself with the ways of drawing a hand. I realise that no one's going to do that and I'm just saying it, but at least I've said it. That's the most important thing. You can see now that the hands are much more clearly defined with those extra details in. And although they're not terribly visible on the photographs, I'm going to add in some of the knuckle wrinkles here as well. Simply because they visually reinforce what part of the hand the image is representing. Okay, so the hands look fine. Now I just need to go in and add in a load of these details here. So I just scaled the point then, and what that does is effectively scales down the line whilst keeping the handles at the same sort of angle. That section there is not 100% perfect, but rather than belabor the point right now, I'm going to just leave it as it is, maybe come back to it later if I can be bothered. Spoiler alert, I can't. Okay, so let's have a quick look at that now. Yeah, right. I feel like we're getting somewhere. Nearly done. I'm going to use an ellipse just to draw this shape just here. You get the ellipse by clicking here or by pressing L, which stands for ellipse in Illustrator. So I'm going to draw this from the center of this ellipse. Hold down Alt to draw from the center rather than from the side. So I'm just going to hold it down until it's about the right shape, and then simply rotate that round so that it's at the right kind of angle. I'm not going to draw every single detail on the back here. I can't be bothered. And as well, I feel like drawing some of the detail that's inside the hand just here is going to make it a little bit harder for people who are looking at it to understand. It's still obviously a hand. If I draw his curled up fingers inside, that extra detail is going to pull away from the image. So in terms of the actual lines, I'm kind of happy that that is finished. We've taken about, here's my timer here, it's about 26 minutes. I've been going through it relatively slowly. Could have whistled through that a little bit faster. But you see that we've got a very clear illustration here that explains exactly, what's going on. And what's nice about this as well is that we'll be able to highlight different sections. I'm just going to make a new layer. There's a whole load of different ways that we can add a little the colour here to pick this out. But I'm just going to do it in a really sort of lazy way. So for this shape that I'm going to draw now, I want to have no stroke rather, and a fill that's maybe 20% black. I'm going to lock the pens, and all I'm going to do, I want to highlight this mouse so that people can make sure that they're looking at the right part of the drawing. All I'm going to do is draw a shape like this. The reason I'm showing you this method of doing it rather than using sort of the paint bucket tool or anything like this, because it's just a very flexible way. You don't have to necessarily draw your image to have all like closed shapes or to accommodate this. Any image drawn the way that I've described will suffice for this. So, for example, if I wanted to have an image where we talk specifically about the mouse, I would be able to highlight the mouse like this. If I wanted to talk specifically about this little guy here, I would be able to highlight him like this. And it adds a little bit of extra depth to what would otherwise just be a pure black and white drawing. Maybe make that a little bit darker so that it's clearer because it's a small object. If I was going to talk about how you needed to make sure that your hand was held in a particular way, I would be able to fill this in and then gradient it out or whatever just there. But I think that this is a reasonable way of working. So we've got this nicely visible, all the hands extremely clear. There's no question about how you would do this. And that's sort of the benefit of this way of working, is that you produce this very unambiguous image at the end. I talked about some of the theory behind why you would use an illustration rather than a photograph when I was talking to the students. I'm always sort of painfully aware when I talk about these things that they're not the sort of technical details that people are expecting from the sessions, but there is a reasoning behind it. Essentially, it's that when somebody looks at an image like this, so you guys who are looking at the video right now are going to be able to see, so there's a hand just there. It doesn't take very long for you to see it. There's a mouse just here, there's this little USB thing here, the other hand just here. And the way that you visually process this, and it's exactly the same way as you would in the real world, is that the first step that your brain has to do is to identify each object from its silhouette and from certain surface details. And the first thing it has to do that is that there's a mental process for what they call figure ground separation, whereas you have to look at visual cues in terms of colours and colour difference and transition to indicate that there is this is the object here, this is an object, this is the background, this is the object, this is the background. Then to visually isolate what the silhouette is and what are surface details, and then use your sort of depth processing in terms of your recognition and recollection in your brain to work out what the shape is a shape of. So that's a hand, that's a hand. Obviously, talking about that takes like a minute. Your brain takes a fraction of a second to do it. But if there are ambiguities or something, it can slow you down. What you are doing when you produce an image like this is you are doing mental pre-processing. You are half chewing the food. You are doing figure ground separation. Is literally what we were doing as we were going along with the pen around the outside of the hand here. In terms of putting the points down and where the line goes, is your brain is doing that thinking literally for the viewer of the image. So you are thinking halfway to the end result you want inside their brain. So you're taking on board some of that cognitive load, and you're removing ambiguity and replacing it with clarity. So that's the sort of the benefit. And as I mentioned in the class, that there's a body of scientific research that indicates that recognition speeds of what an object is and perceptions of details in them are faster with a good quality illustration than they are to a photograph. So, and in addition, a photograph like this, which was taken with no flash, just no complicated photographic setup, can produce what I'll call a professional quality image. Whereas to produce a professional quality photograph actually takes quite a lot longer and requires a lot more resources. So that's the reason for doing it like that. And also it's a lot more flexible like this and will print very nice. So make sure you save your files, make sure your work organized. And I will produce another masterpiece workshop like this in YouTube for you guys to look at some point soon. If anybody has any questions about how to approach this or any of the tools that we've used in Illustrator, then feel free to leave a comment or a message down below in YouTube. Or if you are one of my students, you can collar me at university, or you can send me an email and I will hopefully be able to answer your questions either face-to-face or via email. If you don't have any problems, then congratulations. Then you seem to have done very well, and I hope you and your new skills are very happy together. And I hope you'll join us again for another YouTube adventure soon. If you're interested, you could subscribe, you could like this post, I guess you could share it on Facebook. There's all kinds of different ways that you could get involved, or realistically, you could just watch the videos as they come out and find out if there's something useful in there for you. I hope to see you again soon. Bye!